And we can begin. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Woodburn Accountants and Advisors webinar on the summary of the policies issued by the Chinese government during COVID-19. This is an updated webinar from the one that I did on April 16th. If you joined the webinar on April 16th, pretty much all the slides are very similar. There are a couple of new slides that I've added in here just to provide additional updates that have been occurring within the last 3 weeks. So as is very typical with most of my webinars, I tend to want to get a bit of background about who is on the session. So if you could let me know who you are. I usually define people or companies by the following 3 items. One are the newbies to China. So those of you that are looking to understand more about the Chinese market and gain a certain level of education and understanding, and look at also how to evaluate certain opportunities. There's the startups in China. Those of you that have established an entity in China for, let's say, a period of 1 to 3 years, and you've been focused so much on the core activities of sales or operational functions versus looking at the administration functions, and therefore you're trying to get updated on those situations or improve your organization so that it's more in compliance. And then you've got the experienced China hands. So and I tend to still get quite a few of the experienced China hands online, and it's basically people who are always in need of new and fresh ideas to see how they can improve their businesses. So please do tell me who you are. There are a lot of names that are very familiar to me. So I know Rachel is a newbie. There's Paul, who's a China startup. So there are a lot of names that are very, very familiar to me on the attendee list. If I don't know you, then, please do introduce yourself. It's always nice to know who's attending my webinars. How the webinar works. So I'm not here to sell you anything. I mean, this is truly a webinar on factual situations that are occurring in China. I'm just here to educate you on what the policies are. I'm going to try and give, for any questions that you ask, what I know, and as much as I know and have experience with my set of clients or with friends of mine that have been on the market. So this webinar is slightly different, obviously, than my normal webinar series because it really is just policy giving and any advice I can offer you. If you do have questions, please use the time as a valuable spend. It's going to be 60 to 70 minutes of your time, and we'll be going through policy after policy. Just a little bit of a technical note because this has occurred with a few people. First of all, I don't own GoToWebinar. I'm using it as a platform for my webinars. As such, with the quantity of webinars that are occurring at the moment, you may incur difficulties either with your audio function or with the stability of the connection. There is nothing that I can help you with as I'm presenting. You will have to look at the technical guidelines, but most importantly, don't get frustrated. If you can't stay on, the webinar is being recorded and we will be posting it on the YouTube channel, and I will be giving you the link to that together with the presentation. So I understand it's frustrating times, whether you're using Zoom, GoToWebinar, Google Hangouts, people are getting kicked off left, right, and center, some have to use VPNs. I don't own any of these platforms. So putting your frustration on me won't help. And if I'm presenting, not much I can do either from that side because I have to present. But just remember, it's going up on the YouTube channel, so you will be able to take a look at it later. Another just minor disclaimer, I still have my 2 very little kids with me. They've promised to be quiet, but if you do hear loud noises in the background, it is them. They've promised not to interrupt me. So again, apologies for the background noise if there is some. For those of you that are new, who am I? It's also to put a bit of a face to the voice. My name's Christina Kohler-Coluccia. I'm the head of business advisory at Woodburn Accountants and Advisors. I have over 16 years of corporate services and compliance experience in the Chinese market, specifically in Shanghai. I've been helping over 500 companies with their market entry strategies, implementations, and the acceleration of their growth in the Chinese market. And I'm a creator of the China Roadmap program, which is a program developed to put companies or entrepreneurs or leaders on the right course for their China business. If you want to know more about the China Roadmap program, there is a single webinar on that topic on the YouTube channel. So you can always look at that in your free time. I'm also a writer of an ebook that I wrote in February, early March, about my insights on China businesses during COVID-19. If you would like to receive a free complimentary copy of it, email me personally at Christina@woodburnglobal.com. Type in China ebook and I'll send you a copy of that as a reference guide. So a lot of things that we're covering today. These are the policies that I have become aware of. A lot of them may not pertain to you. The one that is relatively new is compared to the April 16th webinar is on the foreign investment law, because I think I didn't highlight it then, and I think it's something I should highlight now. So we'll get started on these policies because there's quite a bit of content on it. Now, the one that most people ask me about is the tax policies. So we'll get kicking straight off of that. So regarding the tax policies right now, and regarding any policy that I'm mentioning in today's webinar, the key aspect in order to know if your company can gain incentives or can get a bit of that policy applied to you requires a lot of open communication between yourself, the tax bureaus, the banks, and other governmental bureaus. So if you ask me questions, will something apply to me? I can make the assumption it will if you fulfill the criteria, but in the end of the day, it will require very direct and very open communication with the various entities you're trying to talk to about these policies, okay? So the first one regarding tax policies is something where you will have to have an open communication with your tax officer whether certain things will apply to you or not. The first one, obviously, is in return to getting extensions for certain tax filing returns, whether they are VAT returns or whether they are profits tax returns, etc. Initially in February and March, extensions were automatically provided. There were announcements for those. In April, my clients did not obtain any extensions, and it's looking that way in May as well, okay? As such, if you do need an extension because you're having cash flow difficulties, it's all a matter of having that open communication. Now, one thing that has been quite disappointing in reference to tax policies is that there has been really nothing applicable to small, medium-sized companies. Not like there has been in Europe or in the West. So the companies or the individuals that are able to obtain tax exemption and reduction are those that have been in the medical business. So either in the prevention, treatment, transportation, production of COVID-19, anything to do with COVID-19, as well as those industries that are severely affected, like transportation, tourism, hotels, restaurants, basically the hospitality sector, okay? Everyone else, it's really not applicable. So it is quite disappointing, but that is just simply the fact that there is this situation. So that's basically it. I mean, there are basically for companies that are dealing with COVID-19 issues, you can have tax exemptions, tax deductions, etc. If you are in any of these adversely affected industries like the hospitality sector, basically the losses that you have incurred in 2020 can be extended up to 8 years, whereas the original period is for 5 years. Now, if you are not sure if you are in the hospitality sector or if you've been dealing with anything with COVID-19, again, it is a matter of a simple communication with your tax officer to understand where you lie and how you're impacted. one of the first things I did as a company, I did it in March, is I had a conversation with my tax officer saying, can I get anything? Can I get tax exemptions? Can I get reduction? Can I get delays? What is applicable to me? And he provided me a clear understanding that nothing was applicable to me because of the industry that I'm in, based on my P&L statements, my balance sheet statement. I had a very open discussion with him. So it really is a matter of having that discussion. One thing that I do want to mention on this slide, and I'll mention it again later on, is that in Shanghai specifically, and it has occurred in a couple of other cities, is that for the promotion of international trade, you are able to obtain from the Ministry of Commerce a force majeure factual certificate, which can help you to get out of any trade contracts or service contracts because of the COVID-19 outbreak. So that is one thing that is a certain advantage. If you are in a situation where you're getting complaints or there's a breach of contract and you want to understand whether the force majeure article can become applicable, first thing is you should really talk to a lawyer about your contract, the contract terms, etc. And then also in your local city or local district, understand if you can obtain this force majeure factual certificate, which can also help to give a little bit more transparency in reference to any breach of contract that you're being that you've been told that you have breached. On this slide, we're looking at all the tax exemptions and reductions that are provided. And like I said, it is really associated only with companies that are dealing with something to do with COVID-19, whether that's the manufacturing of supplies, whether it's transportation of supplies, whether it's public transportation services, whether it's the cost of new equipment in order to increase the supplies of medical items, etc. All of these types of companies are receiving tax exemptions and tax reductions in relation to their businesses, and they're being provided with these benefits. I guess the only real benefit that's being provided to SMEs is that if you are a company in China and you are a small scale enterprise, not a general VAT taxpayer, but a small scale enterprise, then between March and May 31st, you are able to get a reduction from a 3% VAT rate down to a 1% VAT rate, okay? I've provided the formula here. So if you are a small scale enterprise and if you were not aware of this policy, then this is something you need to immediately address to your tax officer. Look back at the periods of March and April to see what transactions occurred, and make sure that the 1% rate is applicable to you, and it will be also applicable in May 2020. Now, I've had a lot of discussions with my SME clients in China about profits tax rates and deductions. So there is nothing being offered, but I also want to highlight what is generally offered to you, okay, to give you an understanding of how low the rates are actually if you are an SME. So in January 2019, there was a new profits tax policies imposed, not just for profits tax, but also for VAT, which basically stated that there would already be a reduction of SMEs tax burdens, okay? So ultimately, if you have an annual taxable income of less than 1 million renminbi, then your profits tax rate is at 5%. I mean, if you're at that level, you're at the lowest level imaginable, okay? There's no other policy or subsidy that can be provided to you. If you've got an annual taxable income of between 1 and 3 million renminbi, then it's going to be 5% on the first 1 million and 10% on the next 2 million, okay? Again, you can't get any lower than that. So if you want to know if these policies are applicable, if these tax rates are applicable to you, just look at your annual taxable income and understand if you're at these rates. If you are at these rates, it ain't going to get any lower than that, all right? if you're above 3 million, then you are at the 25% profits tax rates. All right. So I just wanted to clarify that. I didn't add that into the April presentation, and I got a lot of feedback saying, you know, why are we not getting any preferential treatment for profits tax rates? And I had to go back into this explanation, and a lot of people, it made it very clear and transparent for a lot of people. So I wanted to add that in today's presentation. Another policy that was provided was an increase of export VAT refund rates of certain products. So the export VAT refund rates are increased for about 1,084 products to a 13% refund, and for 380 products that are plant growth, it's increased to 9%. So if you are exporting, which is something obviously the government is trying to promote, then there is an increase on the VAT refunds that you are obtaining. The next policies that we're going to look at are in relation to foreign exchange. I guess let me just go back a little bit to the tax policy side of things. One thing that has definitely changed is the efficiency within the tax bureaus. Because there was a lockdown for such a long period of time, one of the advantages that occurred was that you could also do a lot of things online, like purchasing VAT invoices, having them couriered to you. This never happened before. It will be very interesting to see whether this remains in the next months, years, who knows. So we will be looking at that aspect as the days go by. But from a collaboration with the tax bureaus and with the tax officers, whereas previously a lot of things had to be done face-to-face and in person, now a lot of things can be done online, by telephone, making it just much faster and more efficient to operate. Regarding foreign exchange policies, very simply, in the past, a lot of things to do with foreign exchange, whether that was foreign currency coming into your company or foreign currency going out of your company for transactions, everything had to be done in person. There had to be certain approval processes. There were certain things you had to do only at the bank in person as well. Now, since COVID-19, there has basically been a green channel created by the State Administration of Foreign Exchange, where a lot of items can be done online, or submission of documents don't have to be made in advance. It just is helping to facilitate everything in regards to cross-border financing, etc. This is particularly critical for companies that have had very difficult periods with their cash flow and have needed to bring in more of their registered capital to help finance the organization. So bringing in registered capital, it's very easy to do the transfer, but once the money actually arrives, you need to show proof of certain payments ahead of time to the bank in order to actually utilize the funds. All of this has changed. Basically, you can utilize the funds straight away, again, helping to facilitate those people or those companies that are in need of getting money and capital to pay off expenses during this period. So that's helped tremendously. On the 24th of March, the State Administration of Foreign Exchange and the People's Bank of China, they also raised the upper limit of risk weighted outstanding cross-border financing from 2 to 2.5 times of the net assets. Basically just helping again with the foreign debt quota. So meaning if people have utilized all of their registered capital, there's been an increase in the ratio between the registered capital and the total investment to bring in more funds in the form of foreign debt. For some of you that don't have entities in China, this may go right over your head because of the terminology that I'm using. But if you do have entities and you understand the terms between registered capital, total investment, and foreign debt, you basically have the ability to have more foreign debt come into the company, again, to help with financing. The next policies that we're going to be looking at are employment policies. And obviously, this has been the most critical chapter for my clients in China. Not all of them, but a good portion of them. So obviously, the first one is anybody who has been confirmed to be infected with COVID-19 or suspected to have COVID-19 or are in the immediate risk of, getting infected by COVID-19, their salaries have to be continued to be paid, and they absolutely cannot be terminated. And that's based on the employment agreements according to Article 40 and Article 41 of the PRC Employment Contract Law. Again, only associated with employees who have contracted COVID-19 have had COVID-19 and are in immediate risk of getting COVID-19. In regards to salaries, this has obviously been the biggest question as people have been developing their strategies about employees in China over the last 3 months. It has really been about, do we lay off staff? Do we cut salaries? Are we allowed to cut salaries? Are we allowed to lay off staff? What can we actually do? So the government is really trying to encourage employers to maintain all employees within their organization. They basically want to discourage you from laying anybody off. Just one statistic I wanted to add in here is the fact that in Q1 2020, so from Jan 1 to March 31st, 460,000 companies were permanently closed in China, okay? And obviously the statistic is heart-crushing. It's unimaginable to know how many people have actually been laid off because these companies have closed down. It's gotten to a point now where even the companies are rejecting applications for companies that are going bankrupt. They're just trying to encourage creditors to ride things out as the economy improves, basically. So as a strategy by the government, what they want to impose as a strategy to companies is to say, as a first reaction, please decrease salary levels before you think about layoffs. Now, the biggest difference between China and pretty much the rest of the world is that there is no such thing as furloughs, where a company does not fire an employee, but tells them, go home and we will maintain you so that once this period of crisis is over, you come back to us, and the government will pay 70 to 80% of your salary. There are certain thresholds there as well. China doesn't have that. Again, a big disappointment for most companies, all right? So what has been the strategy has been basically a reduction of salaries, some by over 50%, where it's up to the employee to then decide whether they accept that or not, in which case it's a termination by force majeure. And then the next step, which we're getting into right now, April, May, even though China is getting out of the crisis, there is still a crisis on supply chain, all right, because Europe, the US, and the rest of the world are still on lockdown. So even though China is coming out of it, those companies that are doing international business and cross-border business, they're still suffering because there were no orders being placed. For those companies where things have to happen on site, it can't happen on site because nobody can travel into China. You're saying China's coming out, but in reality, a lot of these companies are still suffering. So first stage was employee salary reductions. Second stage will probably have to be layoffs. Now, one of the advantages, and I say advantages because there's really no other advantage, is social insurance and housing fund. Actually, I shouldn't have put housing fund. Social insurance subsidies. Housing fund is not a part of that, and that's what's causing a bit of frustration. So from February to April, there was a 50% reduction on pension, unemployment, and injury insurance. And then from February to June, there's a 50% reduction on medical insurance. The issue, for example, in Shanghai, is that housing fund is not part of this reduction, and it is actually the largest portion of the social insurance calculations. As a consequence, when my clients started looking at these calculations in depth, they were saying, okay, well, when I look at the overall social insurance part that I have to pay, it's not a real reduction. And it isn't. It is not a real reduction when you look at the whole numbers. All right. But it is something. So if you haven't done that within your organization, you should be backtracking it. So for example, when the regulation came out, it was like end of February, and most payrolls had already been completed. We calculated everything in March for the back date of February. I have not heard of any extensions in relation to this. I don't think there will be any extensions in Shanghai anyway. If you have heard anything different, I would love to know what you've heard. You know how it is in China, everybody hears something different, but if I have an actual case I can utilize with my own tax officer or my own, sorry, not tax officer, my own employment bureau, that would be amazing. So if you do have any news or updates, please insert it in the question section. I'm sure everyone would love to know if you've been able to receive extensions on that. One of the advantages, again, that the government is providing to companies is if you are not laying anybody off, then you are able to receive a refund up to 100% of the previous year's unemployment insurance premiums that were paid both by the company and the employees. This is only based on whether there have been absolutely no layoffs occurred within your organization. I haven't applied for this yet because I've not been given any understanding of what is the time frame for layoffs. If I did no layoffs up to now, but in July I have to lay off, will it be applicable? Or do I have to then pay it back? This is something that's not clear to me, and it's also not clear to my social insurance contact at the Social Insurance Bureau. If you have experienced this, if you've done the application, again, I would love to know your experience. I think we're all in a period right now of sharing is caring, that if you have done this application and you know how it works, again, share it. Would love to know more about that. And again, one of the advantages that is being provided is if companies are hiring right now college graduates that have that you have signed contracts with them for over a 1-year period, then you will be provided one-off employment subsidies. Again, this hasn't occurred to me. None of my clients are hiring at the moment. So I'm not quite sure what these one-off employment subsidies means or what it actually entails and at what point you get them. So again, and also I don't know if there's a difference when you do the application on actually having hired someone who's a new graduate or you have the intention to do so. So all of this does need to be clarified with the social insurance bureaus. I can tell you right now, my contact doesn't know how this works. I got the impression she hasn't done these applications. So it's a matter of understanding again and having that open communication with them and saying you want to do this application because you've hired new people or you haven't laid anyone off, and how does it actually work? Communication is the key right now with all of these different organizations. Now, in addition to that, there are subsidies that are being offered. So for example, the government of Shanghai is granting subsidies to companies that are supporting the prevention and control of COVID-19 if they are creating jobs, okay? What those subsidies mean, how much it means in financial terms, I'm also not clear. I apologize for not being able to give you so much clarity, but since I'm not doing these applications myself and I don't have clients that are in these situations, it's very hard for me to gauge what it actually means from an operational perspective and what it entails. But apparently you are able to get these subsidies. So if you have been supporting the prevention and control of COVID-19 by creating jobs, then do contact your social insurance bureau do contact the Ministry of Commerce to understand whether these subsidies can be granted to you. The Shanghai government has also granted subsidies to employers within certain industries, particularly the hospitality sectors, in order to maintain stable employment. From certain webinars that I have been on specific to the hospitality sector, it seems to me that every hotel has created their own strategy and plan on how to handle employee retention or how to handle layoffs, because obviously once things start coming out, particularly if you're looking at, there was an April public holiday, there was the May public holiday, and there was a flux of traveling that occurred. The strategies have had, the hotels and other hospitality sectors have had to amend their own strategies in order to at least retain employees and somehow manage all of that themselves without government support. But I am curious to know what type of grant subsidies were provided to these companies. It hasn't been revealed in any of the webinars or presentations that I've attended from that sector. Let's look at the finance policies. And obviously this entails a lot of open communication with your local banks in China. So ultimately, financial institutions are allowed to grant loans to companies that are at lower interest rates and are encouraged to provide financial assistance to those types of companies. The one criterion definition here is lower interest rate. You will have to talk to your banks. What are the other criterias that will befall if you can be granted a loan? Okay. Again, this really requires open communication, that you can talk to the banks about these types of things. And again, because our company is based in Shanghai and I'm updated more in relation to Shanghai regulations and what's popping out in Shanghai, I've used Shanghai as a case study here regarding the banking and financing aspects that have popped up. So, you know, the Shanghai Banking Authority announced the reduction of financing guarantee rates by 0.5% per year. The city is also encouraging banks to renew loans that are due before June 30th, so that it gives a longer period of time for companies to repay the loans, especially in times where they're cash flow restricted. The Shanghai government has also reduced reloan guarantee rates, and the Ministry of Commerce has also required banking institutions to focus on meeting the needs of the core foreign trade enterprises. I love the wording that is always being provided when these policies are coming out, because they are extremely vague. I mean, you know, by saying that the Ministry of Commerce is required that banking institutions focus on meeting the needs of the core foreign trade enterprises. Well, who are the core foreign trade enterprises? What is the criteria that you are a core foreign trade enterprise? So far, I haven't seen anybody that is an SME obtain any of these financial support systems, okay? Another criteria here is that the Commission aims to expand financial support to companies that have annual exports ranging between 5 and 30 million USD. That's an exorbitant amount for, definitely for my startups in China that have been only established for 1 year to 3 years, and definitely for other organizations that have been longer in the market. So again, a little bit disappointing when you're just looking at those two relatively vague criterias. In terms of credit and financing policies, the impression that I have is that every bank has developed, they've been given a vague protocol from the government, and then they've been creating their own internal strategies. So, you know, I've given an example here regarding the China Construction Bank pledging a $30 billion US credit line, Pudong Development Bank on $20 billion US special credit to companies that are severely affected by the COVID-19. Again, really focused on larger organizations and companies that have somehow involved themselves with COVID-19. So not much here really for SMEs. Next, we're going to look at the foreign trade policies. I've been looking basically so far at the individual policies in reference to tax, employment, finance. So let's see how this all comes together and consolidates itself when you're looking at foreign trade. So in terms of foreign trade, basically the government will provide guidance to companies on paperless applications for import-export license. They'll provide legal support to companies to reduce their risks. Like I mentioned earlier, the Ministry of Commerce and certain chambers of commerce are providing epidemic force majeure proof to foreign trade companies or overseas companies so that they can get out of the breach of contract. And then on 5th of March 2020, the Ministry of Commerce announced that it will enhance its policy supports to stabilize foreign trade through these 4 areas: financial, insurance, fiscal, tax, and trade promotion, with the Ministry of Commerce to understand what is actually applicable to you specifically, okay? And how all of these 4 areas can guide you. As I mentioned, a copy of these slides will be provided to you. In addition to all of this, the General Administration of Customs has also released a number of measures, including simplifying registration and record filing procedures for companies, speeding up inspections, and the release of imported production equipment and raw materials, adopting simplified and quicker investigation and decision-making processes to support the import and export that is occurring. The predominant products right now that are being exported from China are PPE materials. It's amazing to see the number of companies that are going into that sector suddenly and trying to export these products into their home jurisdictions. It's fantastic on one level, but there's a lot of ifs and what ifs by trading in these products. And obviously there are announcements coming out on a weekly basis on PPE materials in terms of inspections, government inspections, because of all the fake materials that have been exported in the period of end of March and April. So do check what are the regulations directly with the Ministry of Commerce on that. In reference to large foreign invested projects, now probably a good majority of you on this presentation today are not in that sector of large foreign invested projects. These are projects where predominantly you're looking at the billions of dollars of investment capital that's going into it, and predominantly into construction and infrastructure facilities. But again, the government definitely does not want these projects to be halted. So they have given, again, very vague guidelines on what is being offered. Predominantly, I guess the main thing that's being offered is a point-to-point contact service to make sure that the projects don't get halted, that there's a continuous momentum occurring to have these projects completed and fulfilled accordingly. Let's look at real estate policies. And again, this is something that people are not necessarily aware about, or they don't know how to instigate this. So the government came out basically saying that with respect to real estate that is a state-owned asset, i.e. it's belonging to the government, the landlords are required to reduce the rent. For those where the real estate, the properties are privately owned, the landlords are encouraged, I love that word, they're encouraged to reduce rents. And if the landlords reduce the rents, the government will offer those landlords certain beneficial policies. Now, basically, the outcome has been the following based on my review of my clients. Those that are in the production sector and are basically leasing warehousing space or production space, they have been able to negotiate with their landlords, whether state-owned or not state-owned, because it's not specific here how much rent you get reduced and for the length of period. It's been such a variety of outcomes. One client of mine only got a 1 month reduction. 1 month reduction. So, and it wasn't even a 50% reduction. It was closer to a 70, 75%, a 20, 25% reduction. So, you know, it really has come down to the negotiation with the landlord, regardless of whether the property was state-owned or privately owned. Production has been a little bit easier to, or sorry, a factory space, industrial space has been a little bit easier to negotiate rental reductions. Commercial has been very tricky, particularly for those clients of mine that are in business centers. It's been impossible to get any form of reductions. But again, I think this is a period where you have to have an open communication with your landlord. You have to look at your cash flow. And the reality is if you cannot afford to pay the rent, you're going to have to move out and find something that's a lot cheaper. Which, pardon my language, it really sucks. It sucks for everybody right now if they are in that situation and they have to look for a new property space and then think about relocation, redecorating a space, getting everything installed. It's an absolute nightmare, and there's still an investment cost for doing all of that decoration, etc. So look at your lease contracts, look at the force majeure clauses, talk to a lawyer about how you can negotiate with your landlord in relation to rent reductions. Don't forget that at some point you have to compromise as well, as does the landlord. My impression right now is that landlords do not want to get rid of their tenants because they know it's going to be very difficult to get new tenants. So make sure that your negotiation tactics are reasonable and fair. But I can honestly tell you, even though right now people are all saying China is coming out of COVID-19 and it's opening up. Yes, it's opening up because people are walking in the streets. It doesn't mean that business is opening up. And there's still a lot of companies that are suffering because of the global phenomenon. So there are two areas that can impact your cash flow. One is salaries and one is rent. Those are the first two things you really need to be able to negotiate logically to understand where you stand, and you should make a projection up until the end of 2020 to understand where you, what are your options that are available to you. Healthcare policies. This is more in relation to companies that are in the healthcare sector. So if you are a company that is dealing in new drugs or medical devices that are used for the purpose of preventing and controlling COVID-19, you get a special green channel to go through very simple applications to establish your businesses in China and to take on this opportunity that there is right now. My feeling is if you are doing anything in the healthcare sector, now is the opportunity for you to come in, regardless of whether it's related to COVID-19 or not. I believe that the green channel application will be applicable to you regardless, and obviously then speed up the time frame. This is for me an opportunity. This is what I see as an opportunity for the healthcare sector to really start investigating whether the Chinese market is a market that companies want to go into. I've been focusing so much of March and April on educating people on developing their business strategies and trying to highlight that at some point, and everyone has a different opinion of what that point will be, that there will be a consumption boom and an operational boom. That now is the time to strategize and really think about going into the Chinese market if there really is an opportunity for your business. Get those companies set up now before that boom hits. Because once that boom hits, you don't want your competitors to basically be ahead of you in that game. So if you are in the healthcare sector, definitely think about going in. And there are other sectors as well, such as digital, quite frankly, anything to do with digital, whether it's entertainment digital, consumer digital, anything like that, will be huge developments occurring. The next policy that I'm looking at, again, very specific to Shanghai, is the Shanghai Innovation and Entrepreneurship fund, administration, competition, different words are always being used for this group of companies. Basically, the Shanghai government has allocated funds to support technology-based SMEs through what they've called a China Innovation and Entrepreneurship Competition. For those companies that can participate in this competition and then move to the next step within this competition, there is basically a platform that is provided to these technology-based companies for the use of different service providers, okay? And basically the government provides what's called innovation vouchers to these companies in order to be able to pay off these service providers for anything that they need. It's a variety of different service providers that are on these platforms. Everything from lawyers all the way to research and development specialists. Usually an applicant can get up to 100,000 renminbi worth of vouchers. Now, since COVID-19, companies are getting up to 300,000 to 500,000 renminbi of vouchers in order to make sure that their businesses maintain momentum and continue to grow. There is also subsidies being provided in the form of technology-related loans for an amount equivalent to 20% of the interest rates. And there's also an increase on the insurance premiums that are being offered. So again, I don't know if you know that the Shanghai Innovation Entrepreneurship competition or fund exists. If you are a technology-based SME in Shanghai, you may want to look into this and see if you can apply to be part of this fund and then obviously obtain funding in relation to it. If you are in the cultural and entertainment industry, the Shanghai government has also paid attention to city life services. And basically what they have said is that there is a 3% VAT on all advertising revenue. So again, reduction on taxes for those of you that are in the cultural and entertainment industry. You're starting to advertise for events or promotions. You can obtain either exemptions or obtain a 3% rate. In terms of entry and exit policies, okay, well, a lot of words on this slide. Let me sum up what's been happening. Saturday, March 28th at midnight, the government closed its borders to all foreigners who were looking to travel into China, and that included residents. Hence, I am stuck in Germany. I cannot re-enter. However, having said that, there have been a couple of updates recently, predominantly, I believe it was last week, actually, where the government has said they are going to slowly open up the borders for executives that need to re-enter China. However, the regulation states that the visas and permission allowed to go back in the country will only be for the executives and not for the families, okay? So there are still tight restrictions. I'm not going back to Shanghai unless I have my 2 children with me. So I'm sort of very limited and stuck based on what I can do. And there are a lot of families and obviously executives that are still stuck overseas because they can't get back in. It's unclear to me when these entry and exit policies will be, opened up. I'm kind of taking it day by day. And obviously I'm also in contact with the Chinese consulate in Munich, for example, that's my case, to understand what their updates are. So if you are an executive or you're very simply a foreigner that works in China but is now stuck overseas, the first thing I would recommend to you is get in touch with the closest Chinese consulate to you to get updates. Get on their mailing lists and understand what is allowed and not allowed for you to be able to re-enter. Get updates from them on when the entry might be, because from my, again, common sense perspective is I will be leaving from Munich to get back, so I need to be at the consulate side there. The flights will be dependent on that. So I'm just sticking with the Munich consulate to understand where I stand. One thing I did want to mention, because this question did come up in the April webinar, is that I do know a lot of foreigners who are not on work permit and residence visas, but on kind of business visas that are stuck in China. Just note, for example, if you're stuck in Shanghai, there is a hotline that you can contact with English speakers that are there to guide and help you based on your visa status. So, what I want to tell everyone is you're not alone. There are avenues that you can call to understand what is going on and what you are allowed to do and not do. So if you are stuck in China, specifically Shanghai, I know the hotline number. I don't know it by heart, but I do know the hotline number, and if you want it, just message me and I can send it over to you. Again, those of you that are stuck abroad, get in touch with the Chinese consulate somehow by email. They may not be open. The Munich one currently is only open, I think, 2 days a week. So, understand what the logistics are there with them. Something that is new that I didn't add in the last presentation is in regards to the foreign investment law. And I didn't add it because it's not really a policy that's been issued for COVID-19, but it is a question that's popped up quite often for me now in the last 3 weeks. The foreign investment law was implemented January 1st, 2020, and very unfortunately, it has lost all of the media it was supposed to get, which is why some people have forgotten that it's even existed, or that it's actually even been implemented, and some people are just asking to understand, even with COVID-19, is it implemented? So the foreign investment law is there. It has been implemented. My experience so far with it has been that although it is implemented, it is not fully implemented by every district, bureau, industrial zone, government, meaning that certain information that actually you shouldn't have to be required to give still needs to be given. So for example, you no longer have this concept of total investment, but I've had the experience where I still have to submit that information. So in relation to the actual practicality of the foreign investment law, you really need to talk to your district Ministry of Commerce or your city Ministry of Commerce to understand whether it befalls you, also in the industrial zones where you may be looking to invest. Like I mentioned earlier, one of the things that has really come out of COVID-19 and seems to still be in fruition is the fact that a lot of things have moved online with the government, which never happened before. So there is a real innovative approach by the Chinese government to utilize digital tools for online negotiation, video conferencing, online contract signing, to really keep the momentum flowing for investment that's coming into China. In addition to that, although there is an online platform in each city for doing company approvals, it never used to be, sorry, my daughter, it never used to be in, you still had to do the online application, and then you had to still do the face-to-face meeting and submission of the original documentation. Obviously, since COVID-19, where all the government offices were shut down, everyone was in lockdown, and they didn't want to lose out on these investments, there was still a tremendous push for doing everything online, and no original documents had to be submitted. At least that was in my experience. So the approval, registration processes, everything was moving online to ease the applications that were occurring. In relation to the foreign investment law, I have 2 slides here. I have advice for the new investors. Basically, for the new investors that are looking to incorporate in China and actually make an official investment into the Chinese market, if you go through the application now, you will fall under the new foreign investment law, okay? There are a lot of details that are different from the previous laws on foreign investors, whether it was for a WFI, a FICE, a JV. So do get yourself updated on those differences. For companies that are going in 100%. So if you're a foreign investor and you're going to invest 100% of the shares, there's not too much updates to be provided to you. Okay, the impact is really quite limited. There are just certain updates in relation to organization structure, corporate structure, etc. But not too much really that you have to think about. The advice for existing investors that are operating in China, first of all, if you are a so-called WFI or FICE, meaning that you have a foreign investor that holds 100% of the shares, again, the impact is quite limited. There are certain amendments that you have to make within your articles of association, etc., for your corporate structure, but you have 5 years to do that. So it does not have to go on your priority list right now. Okay, you've got 5 years to make those amendments. For those of you that have joint venture structures in China, whether they were CJVs or EJVs, in that case, there is quite a lot that needs to be updated in reference to the new foreign investment law. Again, not a priority, something that can happen within the next 5 years. If you are in a joint venture structure, my advice to you would be to consult with a lawyer about what needs to be amended in the joint venture contract, articles of association, and the corporate structure. Start with those 3 items. The same goes if you are a WFI and a FICE. There, you can either talk to a lawyer, corporate service provider about what changes you have to do. It is relatively straightforward. I say with a JV, go with a lawyer, because you may find that certain negotiations will have to occur in order to get everything updated. Again, if you are in a period of financial difficulty, this should not be a priority. Okay, you've got 5 years from Jan 1, 2019 to make these amendments. And most likely what I can envision happening is that the Ministry of Commerce or your tax officer will remind you to make those updates, okay? It should be on your to-do list, but not at the top of your to-do list. All right, so that's the conclusion. Well, this is the end of today's presentation. I mean, the conclusion that I'm gonna make is the following. For small, medium-sized companies, the policies that have been issued during COVID-19 are pretty much non-existent. It's been very disappointing for a lot of my clients. A lot of my clients have also tried to compare it to Western law, Western regulations, or their home jurisdiction regulations. You can't relate to it, or it's very difficult to. You need to have an open communication with all of the parties that I mentioned throughout today's presentation, whether it's with tax officers, whether it's with labor bureaus, social insurance bureaus, banks, the Ministry of Commerce. You've got to talk to a variety of different people as to whether these applications will befall you, okay? That would be my main advice to you, is have that open dialogue and that open communication to know what befalls you. If you don't ask, you won't know. How we can help, if you just want to talk, that's something I've been doing a lot lately with some companies. If you're in a situation of financial difficulty, you need to pivot your business, protect your business, or still continue to make profit within your business. I'm happy to have a strategy session with you. In the chat box, I'm just going to put the link to this so that it hooks up straight into my diary. That if you want to make an appointment, I'm happy to set that up. In addition to that, if you want to just simply connect on WeChat, I'm going to give you my WeChat ID, or if you want to email me, I'll also write in the chat box my email address. So that's a little bit what we can chat about. Let's go on to the question section, if there are any questions that have come in. So there is a question from Juan Manuel, who has asked, is it allowed to reduce the working time of employees by around 50% with a salary reduction of around 50%? Juan Manuel, absolutely. So you have to look at your specific situation. You've mentioned to me that you have a factory, so you might have actually tried to maybe downsize it or create certain shifts because maybe you don't have so many orders that are placed, but you can reduce, the most logical is to reduce time with salary, right? Most of my clients, they're not in the manufacturing sector, and what they've done is they've just simply reduced salary with full-time still being applicable. So you can absolutely do that. You can reduce time and reduce it together with salary. It's actually the most common sense and logical thing I would recommend doing. There's a question from Douglas. Are you saying that existing visas are canceled and will have to be reapplied for once the restrictions are lifted? No, my work permit and residence visa is still valid. However, I am not quite sure if it will still be valid by the time I go back into China. It might have expired. Generally speaking, foreigners can have work permits and residence visas for a 1-year period. If yours has not expired, then you can still go into China once the borders are opened. I have a feeling mine will expire and I will have to do an application before I travel back in. The same with my children's visas. So, you know, you have to understand your situation, and this is why I say have an open dialogue with your nearest consulate to know what's going to be applicable to you. So there's a question from John. Could you repeat the point about social cost refunds available potentially if your company has not laid off any staff? Absolutely, John. If you have not laid off any staff, then you can apply to get 100% refund on the unemployment insurance that was paid in 2019. And that was paid by both the employer and the employee. So that's something to keep in mind. If you have not laid anybody off, that you can obtain that refund from 2019. That's an application that should be done with the Social Insurance Bureau directly. All right, there's a question from Christoph. For exit and entry, executives are allowed to enter again. Is it related to any special industry? So executives are allowed to enter again. Yes, it is based on industry. It also is related to your position, and it is also related to whether you are really needed or not. In addition to that, you should probably check with your closest consulate whether you have to do any health checks, tests, or need any medical permits to be able to travel. And see whether that will then be applicable to you. All right, those are all the questions that have come in. I'll just wait another 10, 15 seconds if anything else pops in. All right, we'll move on. Again, if you need any help, you can book a strategy session with me. Happy to have a discussion with you. Links are in the chat box, and a copy of the presentations will also be sent out. If you are interested in learning more about the events we do, the webinars we do, or getting our e-campaign, you can easily subscribe on our homepage or just follow us on LinkedIn. You can follow the company LinkedIn page or my LinkedIn page. You can also subscribe to the YouTube channel, where then you will get updates. Sorry, there's one question that came in from Maggie that I do want to mention here. Are there 14-day self-isolations in force now? The 14-day self-isolation will continue to be applicable. It's very hard for me to say whether it's done right now because I don't know anybody who's entered China so far. But if you are just an executive that will be traveling in, I am absolutely sure there will be a 14-day self-isolation that's enforced. Whether that self-isolation will be in your own home or whether that will be in a designated facility will depend on the city that you are entering into. I know that in Shanghai, they were a little bit lenient where you could do it at home. Beijing was not. You had to do it in a designated facility. So Maggie, I hope I answered your question. I just wanted to sneak that one in. So again, if you guys would like to subscribe, then please do so. We will be having a webinar series at the end of May in relation to accounting and tax issues that you need to be aware of for your organizations in China. So stay tuned for that. You'll get those updates through the e-campaigns that we send out. We will also be organizing a full-day workshop in June in relation to strategy development. So if you want information on the workshop or if you're interested in it, then do email me. That way I can start looking at the numbers because I will be restricting the amount of people that go into that workshop. Again, follow us through the e-campaigns to know what's coming up within Woodburn and the events that we're doing. And again, thank you so much for joining everybody today in relation to this topic. I hope that it provided at least some use for you all. Thank you all again for coming, and I'll talk to you very soon. Goodbye.